Welcome to the Mind Solution podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Hello and welcome to another episode from the Mind Solution, where it's an absolute joy and privilege to be joined today by Giles Croft. And Giles was a former psychology student and NHS surgeon and is now a writer, speaker, coach and trainer, working with both individuals and organisations alike to help them to understand that we all have innate health and well-being within us. So welcome, Giles. Joy to have you here.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure, my absolute pleasure. And I've been following you for a little while and listening to some of your other conversations and podcasts. So I'm very, very, very happy that you've taken the time to humble us with your presence. But for anybody that not at all. For anybody that hasn't heard of you, Giles, I'd love you, because especially some of our listeners are in the US, they might not even know what the NHS is, National Health Service, by the way. I'd love you to just say a little bit about your background and what brought you to this place.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I've always had an interest in what makes people tick. That's the first thing. So yeah, I took a year out of medical school when I was training to do a psychology degree. Looked into did a paper, got a paper published actually, all about the Monday blues. Looked into whether the Monday blues were actually a thing or not. Turns out they're not. It's all about people's expectations. So that was my psychology dissertation. And then as a junior doctor, working in incredibly busy, overstretched environment, I was always very interested in the well-being of myself and my colleagues and patients alike, and really tried my best to change the system from the inside. So I suppose I radicalized a little bit. I became my local union rep in the trust and made HR's life a misery by always trying to get things done and get things changed. And eventually left clinical practice. I was an orthopedic surgery, so bones and joints trainee, and figured that I could probably actually contribute more to the well-being of, again, my colleagues and patients alike by moving sideways into managing the information in the health service, which was absolutely dreadfully managed. I'm not sure it's much different now, to be honest. Apologies to anybody working in the field. I've done my time. I did 15 years there. But I'd always had a really interesting career change. So I used to speak at conferences about career change, because you're not supposed to be able to leave the world of medicine without falling down a hole and dying. And when people leave the service, no one ever hears about them ever again. So it was a real privilege to be able to talk to people about career change. And I suppose as I'd pursued lots of different avenues, because I ended up working for a cycling magazine and stuff like that, stuff that was completely unrelated to my training, stuff that I just loved doing, basically. I spotted some sort of ways that change happened, sort of bits of the jigsaw started to come together for me. And then it was a few years ago when I decided I'd had enough of the health information stuff and got myself a coaching qualification. and was looking into the world of coaching, and it meant that I got back into all the psychology, and stumbled across this understanding that you talk about on this podcast of how our minds work and how we're all innately healthy, that just kind of slotted the final bits of the jigsaw. It's like, oh, that's what I've been talking about for the last 15 years. I had no idea that it was actually a thing. And so now all the work that I do, whether that's with individuals or with groups, I run workshops for groups of staff, is coming from that place of innate health, is of understanding that every single one of us is innately healthy, and we've got it all going for us. But it gets a bit clouded by misunderstanding. So it's a case of sort of unpicking that misunderstanding, really. And that's me in a nutshell.
Wonderful. And I loved well, you did make me laugh when you talked about not being able to escape medicine unless you just fall down a hole. I wondered if you'd ever come across or read the book by Dr. Adam Kay, This Is Going to Hurt.
Yes, yeah, and I watched TV. I actually spoke at a conference with him. I followed him actually, and so that was gosh, that was a trip down memory lane, because it was only on recently, wasn't it? And I left a good sort of, getting close to 20 years ago now. So that was a real. It was like, oh yeah, I remember all that. Yeah, oh, what a terrible environment.
Well, that's the reason I ask, because for anybody that's listening that hasn't come across Dr. Adam Kay or the book This Is Going to Hurt, I highly recommend the book. It's actually very, very powerful, poignant, but also incredibly funny. And it's about a doctor who's an obstetrician, and his experience of working in our National Health Service. And just what you said there about the environment that many individuals in the medical sector find themselves in. And I know that you work a lot with groups like in the social services sector that are operating, not literally as in a surgeon, but they're operating in sometimes what might be very extreme circumstances, maybe underfunded departments, very complex caseloads, life or death decisions. What you would bring to the plate, Giles, for individuals with this understanding of this innate health and well-being when they're sort of just trying to do their job in these quite extreme circumstances?
It's sometimes hard to tease the two apart, but I think something I've sort of got my head round seeing quite recently is that systems themselves, because they're not living things, they're not resilient, whereas human beings are, and systems can really fall short, as a lot of systems do, and it gets to a point where, I mean, in medical terms, you're looking at triage essentially. You're almost on a war footing. It's like, well, we've got X number of patients, but we've only got this many resources. Therefore, we need to literally, prioritize who gets treated first, deal with the serious stuff. It's like you're on a war footing. It's because triage came out of the war. So systems aren't resilient, but the good news is that human beings are, and we all operate in exactly the same way. And we've stumbled upon using the word operate, haven't we? And I used to be a surgeon. I don't know why that's happened, and that might confuse everybody. So we all work in exactly the same way, in that we all experience all of this stuff in exactly the same way. And there's, irrespective of circumstances, irrespective of situations, and I've been there, I've done that, I've got the badge. I did absolutely everything in my power to improve the working environment in the NHS, and it really felt like pushing a large boulder uphill essentially. And I'm sure it's no different now, if not worse. But from my experience with social services and working with social workers and care home managers, they're having an incredibly difficult time over the pandemic, is that they are working in systems that are underfunded, under-resourced, and there's too many things for them to do. There's just like literally not enough time in the day. But their experience moment to moment works in exactly the same way as every other human being on planet Earth. And that's it's happening now. And it just like that one thing, like to see that you can only ever experience now, that's the only thing that you ever get from birth to death, is incredibly powerful in itself, because a lot of the suffering that we experience is because we're identified with our thoughts that are taking us away from what's actually real, what's under our noses right now, and we're dwelling in the future, or we're dwelling in the past. We're listening to a mind as it does its job of trying to predict the future, and it's absolutely rubbish at it, and really identifying with that, to the detriment of the actual experience of life, which kind of, irrespective of any circumstances or any situation, is just trundling along one moment after another. And to help people to see that is they find that liberating, and they get a lot out of it.
And if you were working with an individual or a group of people, Giles, who were coming from an environment where, as you said, the system didn't really support efficiency, and we know that in the UK that systems, whether it be social services, whether it be the NHS, I mean, I was talking to the head of learning and development of a university last week, and she was saying that their whole HR system isn't even digitalized. And I nearly fell off my chair. I'm like, this is 2022. Why would you not have a digitalized HR system? So they have mountains of what could be quite unnecessary work if they had the right systems and processes in place. So if you had a group of people, Giles, that were saying, but we don't have the right systems in place, we're never going to get the funding to get these systems, these are the conditions that we have to live in, let's add, just play with me here, let's add maybe quite a draconian dictatorship type leadership that didn't allow for people to have freedom of speech, and that were just dealing with very complex stuff. And they're listening to you and thinking, well, this all sounds very well and good, but you don't know what it's like to work around here. What would your response be to that?
Well, I'd say you don't need any particular systems to fall out of your thinking and back into the present moment. You don't need anything to do that. You don't need anything at all. That if there are changes to be made, and I'm sure in every single organisation in the entire world there are improvements to be made, and if you want to make those improvements, the best place to do that from, I've seen, is to do that from a place of presence, where you're connected to common sense and intuition and insight and creativity, and all of those things happen in the present moment. All of those things happen in reality. Mm. The good ideas that we have, I mean, it's one of the first questions that I ask my clients and people in workshops is like, well, just take a moment to reflect on, when you have your best ideas, where do your best ideas come from? Where do those, like, oh, I know what I should do, come from? And it doesn't come from,
always the shower.
yeah, it doesn't come from sitting at a desk writing out a list. They come out of the blue. They come out of the blue. They come when we've not got much on our mind. You know, the answers are always the same. It's the shower, it's walking the dog, it's traveling to or from work, it's going out for a walk, it's just falling asleep or just waking up. You know, it's when the mind hasn't had the chance, or it's been given a little bit of time off from taking our experience of life and slapping labels on it, this good, this bad, and creating a whole load of stories about this needs to change in order for me to feel okay. And it's all just a story. It's all a story. It's all the mind taking our experience of life, chopping it up into little bits, putting it into little boxes, and going, right, this needs changing. Da, 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 da. And because nobody's really, you know, slowed us down and pointed us to the fact that actually that's taking you away from the one place you're ever going to experience your well-being, which is now, then we innocently live in it. I mean, I do it all the time because I'm human. It's not like, you know, I live some kind of Zen life or anything. It's just that once somebody's pointed you to the fact that you're living in the feeling of your thinking all the time, moment to moment, then it just takes all the pressure out of these situations. You know, I mean, I've got such a low tolerance for stress now. As soon as I start feeling stressed, it's like, oh, here we go. I'm off again. I'm up in, you know, I'm up in my head about stuff. It's like, let's take a breath, get back to reality. Right, you know, what needs to be done right now, this minute? What's the one thing that needs to change? Oh, nothing, you say. Or it's, what's the one thing that needs to change? Okay, I need to take this one action. It needs to be taken now. Right, done. Boom. Let's move on to getting back to life again. You know, it's like, it's seeing that. It's seeing the mechanics of how we're experiencing the world that just unlocks so much.
And I loved what you said about, actually, there's nothing I need to do. And I think that I know from myself of working with individuals and organizations alike, that this one, they sort of look at you like you're speaking in a completely, you know, you're speaking in tongues, because it's like, what do you mean there's nothing I need to do? Like, I need to do something to change my thought processes. I need to do something to be compassionate to myself. There's always this belief that in order to experience the well-being, that innate resilience, that we have to do something. And is that something that you've maybe found? Don't leave me out on the ledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just the way we've been conditioned. We've been conditioned to believe that that to experience well-being, that we do have to do something, that it needs looking after in some way. It's, you know, I mean, and it's the additive model, isn't it? It's starting from a place of, right, well, you're doing okay, I suppose, but fundamentally you're not, you know, you're not the full package. Therefore, here's 7 things that you can do to make yourself better. And it's just, I mean, I went through a huge, like, personal development odyssey when I first left medicine, because, you know, all of a sudden I wasn't working nights and weekends. It was brilliant, and I was able to read books that weren't medical, and yeah, you know, I took that on board wholeheartedly, and I used to live on my own, thankfully, because I had like little post-it notes of affirmations written all over my little 1-bedroom flat. I used to set my alarm at 5 a.m. to go down to I used to live in Swansea, to go down to the beach with Tony Robbins in my ears and get myself jog on the beach, get myself into a peak physical state, you know, so that I come home in a peak mental state. Now, on the days when I did that, the days when I could be bothered doing that, yeah, sure, I was probably quite productive, but oh my God, it was exhausting. And how many days do you think I could be bothered getting up at 5 a.m. to do all that stuff? So then as soon as you don't, you're a failure. And you know, up comes the mind again. Well, Giles, you know, you can't even do that stuff. There's a reason you're so unhappy and unproductive, Giles. It's because you don't do all the things that you're supposed to do. And it's all the mind, jabber, 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 all the time. And I mean, ironically, I came across this understanding back in those days when I was consuming every bit of personal development there was. I came across an audio program from Richard Carlson, who's like one of the original people who worked with Sid Banks, and his book Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and he had an audio program too, and he used to listen to that, and he was very much of the mind that, well, your thoughts are running away with you, and they're actually making matters worse. And if you can actually slow down and look around you and really appreciate the fact that you only ever experiencing the present moment, and it's only ever your mind that's going to take you away from that. I used to listen to that, and I used to think, maybe I'm making a bit of a big deal out of things here. Maybe I am taking it all a bit too seriously, and I'd feel better, I'd feel better enough to get back to going down to the beach at 5 o'clock in the morning. So, it's like if somebody had just gently grabbed me by the shoulders and said, no, that's enough. That you don't need anything. I mean, I run a monthly online meetup now called Wellbeing Wednesdays, and the strapline for that is, to experience well-being, there is nothing to do, only something to see. When you see that the only thing that's ever going to take you away from the good feelings that you're looking for is your own mind, and there's nothing that you need to do about that than to appreciate that one simple fact, well, everything changes. Everything changes. I know, everything changed for you. Everything changed for me. My life transformed over the course of 9 days. Like, I went from being one person to being a completely different person just by, like listening to some podcasts a bit like this, hearing people talk like this, and then reading a book. It was like, oh, why did nobody tell me that?
I love it. I love the idea of you sitting there with all your affirmations. I guess there's a couple of things that strikes me about what you just shared, Giles, that for anybody that's listening in, it's not that we're saying you shouldn't do those things if you just genuinely enjoy them. I know for me, I am one of those crazy people that gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning. For a start, I am one of those crazy people. And I live in Scotland, so it's not always the right weather conditions for going down to the beach. But something that I am just currently studying something called quantum flow, which is all about breath work and energy and movement. It's nothing to do with like what's going on. In fact, it's wonderful for actually just getting out of your head. But just doing that as the sun rises, oh my God, like my heart literally feels like it's going to explode. And I feel so, that sense of connection to who we really are, like it's like it's vibrating through every cell in my body. And if it makes sense to somebody that if they want to do affirmations, because there's maybe some people that go, I quite like my affirmations, or they like meditation, or they like listening to Tony Robbins. How that man can still speak is beyond me. He's going to lose his voice one day. I guess what we're saying is that we're not discouraging people if it makes sense and you enjoy it, but it's recognizing that we don't have to do that in order to experience innate well-being and resilience.
Yeah, I suppose the delineation to make here is the difference between something being prescriptive and something being descriptive. What we're talking about is descriptive. I don't care what you do between you and me. You can do whatever makes you happy. Do whatever you love to do. Personally, I absolutely love walking out in nature, but it's not the nature that's giving me well-being. It's got nothing to do with the properties of nature, and it's got everything to do with the fact that well, for me personally, when I'm out in nature, which is about as real as it gets, and it hasn't got any of those kind of like human-made sharp edges, all the left brain stuff that we've created as humans, when for me, it's very, very obvious when I'm out in nature, when I am up in my head. It's like I'll be in a really good feeling with nothing on my mind, and I'll just be out walking, and then all of a sudden I'll feel some tenseness. Now, when I'm out in nature, tenseness just seems like really alien, and so it's just very obvious to me. Oh, for a minute then, I'd let my mind start to wander about something, and it had maybe gone from that nice, free flowing, very natural, inspired, creative thinking. Because you go out walking, and your mind knows about the stuff that's on your calendar, and the situations that you want to change or deal with, or stuff that's looming. But it's very obvious to me when I've switched from that free flowing creative thinking into rumination and worry, and it's like it comes from the feeling. I can almost feel. I mean, one of the metaphors that I use is like the aperture of a camera. If anyone listening to this is old enough to have a proper camera with an actual aperture rather than just an iPhone, the aperture lets the light through, and when we're in that free flowing sort of almost like pure consciousness, pure thoughts, not really contaminated by our own personal egoic thinking, then everything just flows, and it feels good. To me, that's aperture wide open. There's loads of life coming through. Well, the feeling of our aperture closing and all of a sudden it's all about us, and our problems, and how we have to fix them. How the mind, and it doesn't like that, the mind, because it's like, oh no, I have to fix this problem, but I don't know how to fix this problem, and that's really stressful. And of course it is, because it's not the mind fixing these problems, it's life delivering the solutions to us, if we let it, when we're in that. It's been called all sorts of things over the years. It's like, you can call it wisdom, you can call it, being in flow. It's like, look at any sports person or musical performer, and they'll all say, yeah, didn't really have much on my mind at all. I was just in flow. And I get it when I'm writing. I'd encourage all listeners to really examine, the next time that they're sort of really engrossed in some creative endeavor that they really love, is to just reflect on what's going on there. Reflect about whether their aperture feels wide open or whether it feels tightly shut, and sort of how much of themselves and their notion of self, and how much it feels like they're actually involved in that process. For me, if I'm sat writing an article for the magazine I write for, it's like there's very little Giles there at all. It's just the words are coming through me. I get to the end of it and I look back and I go, blooming heck, I couldn't have written that. That's too good. I don't take any credit for my writing
when it comes to my writing.
Yeah, well, I love writing. I love writing. Yeah.
But it's so interesting what you said, because you're absolutely right about, there are times that I've gone down to the beach and I am so connected to life force that I literally feel like I could float into the sky. But then when somebody appears with two dogs, and the dogs are yapping away and barking and sniffing around my feet, and I'm like, I'm trying to get connected. And I know that I've just fallen out of the present moment.
Well, and again, it's not, if we're being rigorous here in our logic, it's not even the dogs, it's your thinking about the dogs. Exactly. And I've been out. I mean, I remember having a terrible coaching session of my own once, and it just served to just get me up in my head completely. And I thought, right, I know the answer. I'm going to go out for a long walk. So I put my shoes on, put my boots on, and I went out for it, and it was gorgeous, and I didn't see anyone, and I didn't see any dogs, and I went to one of my favorite places, and I came back and I was still just as miserable as I was. So it's not nature that's doing it. It's not nature. It's this inbuilt homeostatic mechanism that we've got. It's the same process that balances our blood sugar after a meal. It's the same process that allows our eyes to dilate and constrict when we look into lights and things like that. It's the same process will balance our moods, will help us to fall out of our thinking and back into the present.
What I'd love to get your thoughts on, Giles, from your experience of working with groups and organisations, is We know that sadly, organisations aren't always Zen-like cultures in their leadership, and there's a lot of organisations which the leaders might do a really good talk, but actually the underbelly of it is that their behaviours can be very bullying, very sort of draconian. They don't allow people to, behaviorally speaking, they shut down people. People aren't allowed to be their true self, or don't feel that they can be their true self. And where we're talking about how we're experiencing things, to be able to distinguish between the fact of what's actually happening versus what somebody's experience of that is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what I heard you say is in a really testing environment, non-resilient environment where resources are scarce, how does somebody in that environment what
Well,
notice or know or
so I guess the angle I'm coming from is there are people in organisations that are bullies.
mm-hmm.
Their behaviour is one of bullying, or maybe quite passive aggressive in their leadership style, quite dictatorial, micromanage people. And I guess for somebody that might be listening in, that's maybe experienced or is going through that themselves, that what I don't want them to hear is, oh, you're just creating that whole experience for yourself. And not recognizing, well, we're not saying that this stuff doesn't happen. Our experience of it can be quite different, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a fact that there are those behaviors present in the workplace. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I mean, what we're talking about here is principles, and again, there's no judgment of right or wrong here. Situations occur. And not saying that there aren't bullies. Of course there are, and everybody's experience is real. I suppose what we're pointing to here is the principles behind that experience, the principles that underpin that experience. They're exactly the same for the bully and the bullied. So the bully, they're experiencing their own thinking like every minute of every day, and that's really helpful to see. It's very helpful to see that how does the saying go, that hurt people hurt people. It's like, it doesn't, there's no excusing the behavior. Maybe, we don't have to excuse the behavior, but it really helps to understand the person. It really helps to understand how, firstly, and what I found again with myself and with my clients and with groups, is that the more that we see how our own experience is working, and we have some insights around that, again, nothing to do, just stay curious and look in this direction, listen to some more episodes, maybe watch some videos on my YouTube channel, there are plenty, and when we start to see these things for ourselves, it's a very natural thing it's like, oh, hang on a minute, yeah, they're up against exactly the same thing as well. And it just tends to take the all the pressure out of the situation. And it's very hard to bully somebody who can't be, who refuses to be bullied. It's like, well, the whole again, I'm not judging either side of this at all. I'm a scientist. I apply a ruthless logic to every situation, and all I know, I play it close to home. All I know is that in any interaction between two human beings, both of them are experiencing the thought perception in any given moment, and to the degree to which they see that is going to dictate their behavior. It's going to dictate the behavior. If I know that my well-being is not at risk from anything that anybody does or says to me, okay, we've got a physical body to look after, but the human body's evolved enough to like move out of the way of punches and slaps and stuff. It's pretty good at that, like there's a whole load of reflexes built in. So look after your physical body, wear your seatbelt and be present when you're crossing roads and stuff. But if I know that my psychological well-being is absolutely not at risk from anything whatsoever, because all I'm ever experiencing moment to moment is the perceptual process, is thought itself, is the creative power of thought. Well, then it just all these situations look completely different, and we do feel more empathy and compassion for anybody, whatever their behavior.
Yeah. And I wholeheartedly agree that the insight into these principles that we're talking about, it just raises that level of awareness and consciousness, so that when you do see the behavior, and as we say, we're not condoning that behavior, we're not condoning any kind of behavior, but when you can just see it for what it is, it just sheds a very different light on things. So we can absolutely see the benefit of bringing this understanding, bringing these principles to the workplace, to sort of use almost prevention over cure to change organizational cultures, to really to help to transform leadership. I'd also love to know from your experience of working with groups, what have been the other benefits that you've seen of bringing the principles into the workplace?
Oh, they're they're endless. That's the beauty of working so far upstream. When you work like all the way upstream at like, okay, so how is our experience being created moment to moment? That we don't have to try and change behaviors. We don't have to try and change thought. We don't have to try and do anything. We just need to shut up, slow down, listen with an open mind, and it's like we have those little oh yeah, I'd never really thought about it that way. And life tends to deliver, because we're talking about principles here that are in operation 24/7. It's like gravity. You can, if you get up in the morning and you go, right, I don't believe in gravity today, good luck to you. You're more than welcome to do that. It's the same with these principles. You can get up in the morning, well, I'm not going to experience life in thought today, I'm going to experience it some other way. I'm going to feel all my circumstances directly. Well, fair play to you. Give it a go, see how you get on. But when when we've seen how our experience is being created, like just all the stuff downstream of that just tends to sort itself out. So I've had people on my workshops who, the big one for them is that they're sleeping better. That I get so many people on my course going, oh my God, I always make a point of asking them at the beginning of the course, if I could make the old coaching question, if I could wave my magic wand and give you one thing, what one thing would make the biggest difference to your life? And a lot of them go, I'd like to be able to sleep better. I'd like to be able to leave work at work, and not be thinking about work all the time I'm at home. Or I'd like to be less anxious in general. Or people have who've told me about mental health diagnoses that they've had, and they've like, well, I'd love not to have this mental health problem that I've got. And at the end of the 6 weeks, many people, they are sleeping better. They are leaving work at work because they can see exactly how their experience is being created, and it just doesn't make sense to worry about stuff anymore. It's like, why would I do that? And it really happens on a really fundamental level. So I've had people say all sorts of things to me about things that have changed. I had someone phone me up after a session not all that long ago who'd had a string of mental health diagnoses, and said, it's just dawned on me that those were just labels, and there's actually nothing wrong with me at all. And all of the things that I've been told to try were coming from a place of, well, there's something wrong with you that's broken and we need to fix. And so all of the different things that we tried over the years were actually holding that in place. And I've suddenly realized that there's not actually anything wrong with me at all. And I'm perfectly mentally healthy in every moment that comes along. And I was just like, oh, what? That's just
Oh,
absolutely amazing. And
wonderful.
that came from, this isn't a course that's specifically about mental health at all. It's just pointing people in the direction of the principles that underpin their experience of life moment to moment. And it's beautiful and magical what happens for anybody who has
Absolutely.
insights around it.
And I love what you say, because knowing and embodying these principles more and more myself every day, even as somebody that's worked for the last 10 years as a therapist, this is such a new perspective on mental health that's so far removed from what's taught to practitioners, taught to GPs, that it's like I always knew at some level that it could be easier than this. So when I stumbled upon the principles, it was like, oh, I literally felt like I found the secret to like the holy grail, and then thought, oh my goodness, I've spent a lot of money training in different things that I didn't
Yeah.
need to train in. But as the saying goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah.
And it's almost like when I'm working with groups, probably like you, it's like you put them into an elevator at ground zero, and imagine that the elevator is made of glass and they're going up and they're going up. Because at first, I don't know about you, I often find with groups that there's, even like it was with myself, there's a bit of head scratching that's going on. It's like,
For sure.
you're telling me that none of this exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, I sound crazy, bear with me. But as
Yeah.
you take them up that elevator and they start to see that landscape, they start to see the truth. It's like, wow, everything just that they thought about themselves and their beliefs and their ideas and identity, it just falls away, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It is beautiful. I feel like like the luckiest man on earth. Like when I'm working with groups and I hear these little stories of change. And it's funny because you said it's completely new. It's kind of not new. It's the opposite, really. It's like it's been around forever.
It's been what's
Every
underpinning the universe.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And humans were doing pretty well before somebody came along and invented psychology. Thanks very much. And you look to all the ancient wisdom. It's all true. It's all true. It's all pointing to exactly the same thing. You look at all of the ancient wise and like Taoism and Buddhism. I mean, here in the West, we're very, very sort of left hemisphere oriented, and whereas in the East, there's a bit more awareness of that more right brain experience, the being rather than the doing. Um, but yeah, it's very different because we've been literally conditioned. We exit the womb, and from the very first moment, it's almost like we come into the world knowing all this stuff. That's why babies are brilliant, aren't they? Look into the eyes of a baby, and it's like, oh, they've got it sorted. Look at that, and they're just experiencing pure consciousness. They've got no sense of self, and they're just like
And they're so
experiencing
flexible.
everything, and it's all and it's all just like this mush of activity, and they just like go from one moment to the next, and people changing their nappies for them and feeding them, which is where it all begins, isn't it? It's like, oh well, I need that thing from outside to help me, and then we slowly but surely, as life goes by, we get conditioned by our parents and our teachers and society to believe the lie that we need something outside of us to make us feel good. And we buy into that because why wouldn't we? It's everywhere. It's in, switch on the TV, go into a shop, bump into somebody and say, I'm not feeling great today. I'm not in a particularly good mood today. What's the first thing they say? Oh no, what's happened? Thereby reinforcing the illusion that it's circumstances that create our moods, where in reality it's the mood we're in, our level of consciousness in any given moment is going to create the reality that we experience. And
Absolutely.
I know that sounds weird, but stay like if you're listening and you're like, oh my god, he's lost me. If you're listening, stay curious, because honestly, you know, this is nothing about having to understand or get anything, or, you know, it's got nothing to do with you know, education or background or history or anything like that. This is just the way that all human beings operate. And the more you look in this direction, the more likely it is that life will deliver an insight to you, like something really, really normal will be going on in your life, and all of a sudden you'll go, oh, that's what they were talking about in that podcast. And then it's like a little switch will click and you'll go, oh yeah, gosh, yeah. And whether that happens in like one big thing, you know, for me it was like pretty big, or more often it's just like these little incremental falling away of bits of understanding that happen over time, and we get deeper and deeper, we get closer and closer to who we really are, and closer to the truth of how we experience the world. And honestly, life just gets easier.
It so does. It so does. And I think sometimes, even with this understanding, as you mentioned earlier, Giles, we are human. It's not like Giles and I are walking around like Zen masters, never getting tripped up and sometimes falling into our thinking and maybe finding ourselves feeling a bit whatever. But I don't know about you, I don't tend to spend very much time there now, because I'm like, oh, I've just done that thing again. Okay.
And I don't judge it, because it's just like being human. That's what human is. You know, it's human to fall for the illusion. It's human to get lost in our thinking, believing it to be more real than it is, believing it to be like the rock solid truth. And boy, when I'm in a low mood, does it look like rock solid truth? That's the great irony, isn't it? When we're in a high mood and we're sort of very magnanimous, and you know, everything's like water off a duck's back, and we've not got a care in the world, and we're just like flying, all this stuff is the last thing on our mind. When we're in a low mood, we absolutely cannot see the truth of what is going on, and it's like, no, you're wrong and I'm right, and like yeah. And even if somebody said to us, well, had you considered that was just your thinking? Although that happened to me the other day. My daughter, who's 8, you know, she's been around this understanding since the age of 5, and she calls me out on it now. I mean, I lost my rag the other day just because of some stupid scheduling error I'd made. Twice I made the same error twice, and I was ranting and raving to myself. And she came upstairs and she said, Dad, don't you teach people about this stuff? Don't you teach people about this stuff? Dad, why are you getting angry about that? You know, it's just your thinking, don't you? And like, for once, because it was my daughter, it just like, it instantly cut through it all. I was like, oh, what? Yeah, why am I making such a big deal about it? But it was interesting. I reflected on it and wrote about it. I'll share a link to the article. I think it's online somewhere. Because, you know, I didn't judge myself for getting angry.
Yeah.
I didn't judge myself for making the mistake twice, because it's like, well, you know, shit happens. Basically, we make mistakes. We're human. We're fallible. I can either dwell on that, and I can stay in that bad feeling and continue to worry about it, and have a whole load of judgments about how I am and who I am and how I'll always be rubbish at A, B, or C. Or I can just get over it and let it go, and wait for, you know, wisdom to reappear. And it did. As soon as my daughter said that and I fell out of my angry mood, I was like, right, what do I need to do? Okay, I need to get in touch with that client and I need to tell them that I've made this scheduling error. Whereas previously I'd have probably spent like literally hours beating myself up and procrastinating on actually taking the action that I needed to take, which was to get in touch with the client, thereby making the whole situation much worse. And it's so normal. I think this is why we don't see it, because it's just so normal. It's like, it's everywhere in our life, every single minute of every day. that we're living in this world of thought, and we don't notice. And so, yeah, like you, none of these things last very long. I spot it a lot quicker. I fall out of it. I don't hold on to my thinking at all. I let it pass on through, and before you know it, I've moved on. There's that brilliant Ted Lasso. Don't know if you've watched Ted Lasso on Apple TV. It says the happiest animal on the planet Earth is a goldfish because it's got like a 5 second memory. Be more goldfish, people. Let stuff go.
I love that. I love that. I thought it was 2 second memory. Is it not two?
Oh, is it two? Oh, right. Well, it might even be two. Yeah, yeah. But there's something for us to learn there. Be more. We've got this superpower as human beings, the ability to forget. Like that's an unrated superpower. We have the ability to forget. We can just move on and reinvent ourselves in any moment that comes along. Essentially.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that feels a wonderful, wonderful place to leave it, Giles. So, if there are any individuals or organisations that are keen to explore things with you further, what's the best way of getting in touch with you, Giles?
Head over to my website, gilespcroft.com. Everything that you need to know is over there, really, and all links to social media. I spend time on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, so all links to that are on my website. That's gilespcroft.com. I've got a YouTube channel as well that's got loads of free resources on it.
Well, I will be quite happy to go and check some of those out myself. Thank you so, so much for your time, Giles. If you want to stay on for one more second, and I'm just going to say thank you to everybody that's tuning into this episode. We absolutely trust that it has given you not food for thought, but it has allowed some space for that insight to emerge within you. So until next time, goodbye from us.
Bye-bye.